expenditure report to November 21. Can we do this all together, or can we stop?
Well, Madam Chairman, and I think Roman numeral 3 is it's quite a large item. I don't know whether you want to do. I mean, I'm in your hands, Madam Chairman, how you want to do this. But the income and the expenditure reports, Roman numeral 1, is simply a snapshot of where we are at any particular moment in time, and that's a requirement that the auditors like to see, that this committee seems to scrutinise the town council's income and expenditure. So you have that report, that's Roman numerals 6.1, and is in portrait format. So much of the information is repeated on the budget report. So maybe sufficient for the committee simply to receive this report unless there are any specific questions.
No, it looks good.
And so to move on to Roman numeral 6.2 is the verbal update report following the in-house audit subcommittee meeting which happened earlier today with Deputy Clerk, myself, Councillor Butchins and Councillor Newmark.
Yeah. Jeremy, do you want to kick off? Or should I just
I'm happy for you to kick off, fine.
What it might be. Yeah, so we saw details of the investments, and it's confirmed that they do count as part of the general reserve, which was a comment that was received during one of the audits, that the general reserve seems to be a bit low, but they haven't included the investment. We're going to investigate investing through Hartsmere Borough Council, who have Jeremy knows more about it than I do, but they have a money market investment,
Cash fund.
which takes me back a few years. And
Hedge fund.
No, cash fund. Not just a hedge fund, Sandra. This isn't the Conservative Party.
I also asked if other parish councils use them, if we could find that out, it would be helpful information. And we're also going to check with Metrobank what accounts are available for us to use. We were presented with the possible precept, the 3% increase, just figures to look at, as it were, which would represent a £1.10 increase for Band D properties. The last increase was 2020, which is 2%. Previously, it had not been changed for a few years, not quite sure how many. Budget does come out a significant increase for various reasons. I won't go into it at this stage. The business rates are still zero because of whatever it was that happened a couple of years ago. We have moved away from using cheques. They're very rarely used now. And our Deputy Clerk is happy with the way the online banking is going. Those are the main points that came out of it.
Yeah, just the suggestion on investments came about as a consequence of the fact that, now on aggregate, I think we're earning less than 1% across the three funds, and it's my understanding that the money market funds that the borough operates is doing reasonably significantly better than that, and also provides the benefit of having immediate access to the cash if necessary. So we felt it was worth investigating in that. I mean, my sense is that the returns we're getting at the moment barely, if at all, actually cover the cost of staff time that's used to sort of administer these funds. So we do need to try and find a way to do better. That might be going through Hartsmere, it might be aggregating them together in future. We sort of did quite a depth charge exercise on the draft budget, which is only a draft. It does currently come in at quite a significant deficit, but we explored a number of ways of addressing that, including the possibility of some of the proposed new staffing roles, or at least one of them being paid for through SIL expenditure, because that role will primarily be concerned with administering projects that come under the ambit of SIL. We also, I think there are a number of areas of expenditure that currently appear in the revenue budget that we identified as possible candidates for capital expenditure to come from capital reserves. So although the sort of projected deficit looks daunting at the moment, my own view, I agree, is that there's sort of every possibility of reducing that as we get nearer to the budget setting point. We also flagged an issue whereby, according to the figures, we appear to have made a profit on the Youth Council last year, and that profit doesn't seem to have sort of been carried over into the Youth Council budget, which we thought was problematic. But yeah, I think we really spent most of the session depth charging the draft budget. So I think it's a good discussion.
Thank you.
To you,
Oh,
Madam.
just wait, yes, okay, carry on.
I'll just add my input to the, agree with everything that's been said just from the staff point of view.
Okay.
There was also I think some of the in-house auditors, as has been highlighted, felt that the actual risk of amalgamating the three funds is probably so low that it's a very possible option in the future to invest the money en bloc, rather than to separate it out into the three £100,000 amounts. In addition to that, I provided a report from a meeting I had with the Economics Development Officer at Hartsmere Borough Council, and it was a very useful discussion, not least for highlighting possibilities, some of which have been actioned today, for joint working in the town council, reaching out to local businesses with the town crier and for sponsorship. But also an input that the town council, new councillors could have into shaping the future of the high street in terms of its as a retail centre and to promote a thriving local economy. So it was an incredibly useful meeting, and I welcome future discussions. I'll keep you informed of what's happening. But some of the actions, such as the network of businesses being utilised immediately to distribute town criers to, but also to highlight council events such as the upcoming Christmas switch on event, is already taking place now. So it's very productive from that point of view.
Thank you.
No, nothing about it. Might
Okay.
be too short.
Thank you, Hugh. 7, exclusion of,
What-
where are we up to?
Well, we're up to Roman numeral 3 now,
Okay,
Madam
okay,
Chairman,
okay,
which
sorry.
is the actual budget
No,
itself.
it's
And what-
going,
What I would suggest that you do, I'm in your hands, members, is to go through the budget, and we'll seek to answer any questions you have. But as Councillor Newmark and Councillor Butchins have indicated, this is a draft. This is a notional budget. It's not a recommendation. The 3% on precept. I have the figures up here on the wall for you to show how they're broken down. It's just a notional sum to shows you what that amount would look like in terms of increasing that or keeping it the same in the future. With regards to the 103 salaries budgets, they're based on all of the what used to be called Part 2, now excluded Part recommendations going through. And as Councillor Newmark has said, there's possibility that those proposals could be phased or not carried out in full or funded from other sources. So that's what it would look like if you were to utilise the budgets alone to fund those positions next year. There are several other areas. I don't know how much time you want to spend going through this budget. It could be a very lengthy exercise. We have gone through it today, and Tracy and I are both going to take on board all of the recommendations that were presented to us and find out answers to some of the queries about it and present that again. But the next time you may be looking at this is at the full council meeting. I think it's on the 19th of January.
okay.
So, really be guided by you as to what process you want us to follow next, and how much time this evening you want to spend going through it line by line, if at all.
Members, what would you prefer?
Will there be another opportunity to go through it as a GMC?
Can I just have an answer to what I've just asked? And what would you prefer?
We, as I say, depth charged this line by line this afternoon, and I think we gave Hugh and Tracy a significant list of points to consider and come back. So I'm not sure there'd be much value in repeating that exercise now, but perhaps if people have got one or two general questions, I mean, I certainly do, we could address those and then move on and reconsider the new draft budget at the next meeting.
There's no scheduled GMC meeting before council, but if you're happy, I think because it was a COVID year last year, we did it by email. We could do it as a sort of email consultation exercise for the committee. Or if you want to meet in person, we'd have to schedule another meeting, however you want to do it. But yes, let GMC members have another look at the budgets before full council.
I think, sorry, I think whether or not we can do it by email is going to depend on how the conversation that we have to have in part two goes today.
Exactly, yeah.
And the delta of deficit. I think we still have a very large deficit. We need to have a GMC meeting to discuss it. If we're able to reduce that, then I think it's reasonable to do it by email. But when we're talking about the delta approaching 200k, I think that's got to be discussed at an open meeting.
Okay, Richard, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just obviously, like you guys have said, you've had quite a full-on meeting today around this. So out of that, maybe it might be good just to kickstart us as a committee on the areas that you want to highlight, just so it gives us some sort of points where you've actually found some issues and concerns.
Well, I mean, we sort of outlined that earlier. It was the extent to which a number of items in the revenue budget actually could be classed as capital expenditure. It was the extent to which some of the proposed new to the staffing roles could be either phased in over a period of a few years, or in one case actually paid for through until funding because of the nature of that particular role. I think those were the main areas. There was lots of detail in terms of some of the headings that we felt needed looking at. I think we did say that there are some areas which will, because we're going through a transition period, there are some areas next year that GMC and full council has decided to invest in, like funds for some consultancy work to look at integrating all of our IT systems, which might see a spike in expenditure next year, but the long-term benefit would obviously be to save money over time. So I think those are the highlights, really.
I can't remember agreeing to consultancy for IT. I can't remember that.
Yeah,
Just to refresh my
yeah,
memory.
so in total, there's an additional £10,000 worth of consultant fees in the budget for next year.
Yeah.
£5,000 for IT consultants to help to unify all of the financial and electronic services that the council utilises and provides, and 5,000 for potential consultants to help with any building works or future developments of this site or other sites in the town. Those were agreed at the last GMC meeting. So yes, so that's one sizable chunk. The revenues, as opposed to capital items that Councillor Newmark's referring to do with things like benches and notice boards and stuff like that, to use perhaps general reserve if they're one-off items of expenditure, to fund it from there rather than to budget for them. There were some increases, in fact, some sizable increases in my opinion for utility costs because of increases we've seen, for example, water rates and so on. But conversely, we'd also factored in, yes, the fact that those known quantities, such as the fact that we know we're not going to be paying business rates next year, but also we're budgeting for higher amounts of Fairway Hall income and higher amounts of allotment use. So yeah, there were one or two areas, and then in honesty, they're not sufficient to worry over necessarily about where we've under budgeted the amount of income we were receiving for something like stalls hire at Family Estate, because we'd only taken it for 1 day as opposed to 2 days. But all of the action points that the committees, the craft committees, whether they be entertainments or GMC, had asked for, have all been factored into this budget. So that's, the reason why it looks so significantly high. And the elephant in the room is certainly the staffing costs, which are based on the additional posts outlined as
Okay,
on the orange papers this evening.
okay.
Can I just give a couple of examples
Yes, sorry.
on it? First of all, under 2647 information boards under street furniture, there's 7,500 in the budget for the footpath boards that is John Carson's project
Right.
to illustrate where footpaths are. And the other thing I was just going to mention, other than a lot of water being used at the allotments, which needs a little bit of investigation, possibly. There was some equipment, punching up
Rotavator and mowers.
2143 on the maintenance, which is really capital expenditure for equipment for borrowing by block holders. So that will go into a capital budget.
And
Yeah, and just to add to that, sorry, and Clive and I both forgot to mention, we did discuss at some length the increase in the energy and utility costs. And apart from the fact that there are general increases out there, we suggested that Tracy and Hugh might look into some of the shared purchasing schemes that should enable us to aggregate our purchasing with either other local authorities or even to the corporates, and use that purchasing power to reduce costs moving forward.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you very much, Hugh. Sorry, Simon.
I just wanted to ask actually to Jeremy and to Clive, if that's okay. The funding staff salaries out of SIL money. Now, SIL money, I mean, do we know how long SIL money is going to be coming for and how much we're going to get? How are we going to be receiving SIL money for? I mean, changing our staff structure is a long-term commitment, and will the SIL funds be a long-term revenue stream to fund long-term commitments for additional staff?
Well, first of all, the government had talked about reviewing SIL, but that seems to have gone nowhere. So I think it is going to be the system for the foreseeable future. To be as specific as we can within the context of the fact that some of this is part two, it's not funding general staff salaries from SIL. It's one very specific proposed position, the work of which will be effectively to administer projects that are SIL projects in their own right. In my view, the contracts for that, or the employment contract for that post, would have to be linked to the availability of SIL money. But having said that, if you look at the amount of development that's being planned in the town under the local plan, one could very reasonably expect a fairly large spike or increase in the amount of SIL we receive over the period of the local plan. So we're talking sort of 10 to 15 years. And in addition to that, if we move forward with the neighbourhood plan that is being proposed, the amount of SIL that the town council receives will increase, I think, from 15% to 25% for every development within the area covered by the neighbourhood plan. So all these signs are that for the foreseeable future, we'll have a significant increase in SIL income. And actually, the challenge might be finding worthwhile projects to spend it on.
So basically what you're saying is that we offer a fixed term contract, and that fixed term, the salary cost of the fixed term contract will come out of SIL.
Yes,
That would be an option. Yeah.
but we obviously need to discuss the detail in part two.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Hugh. Anybody else? Richard? Pat? Anybody? No? Okay, okay. So, we're up to 7, item 7. Okay, exclusion of press and public. The chairman to move the following resolution. The it's under the Public Bodies Admission to Meetings Act 1960, small s 1, 2 brackets. The press and public be excluded from the meeting whilst draft proposals for premises development and staffing matters are discussed. Anybody want to do that for me? No?
I think that's one of those.
You
Okay.
agreed? Is that agreed?
Yeah, great.
Thank you. Fairway Hall development.
And do you want to make sure that's on?
Has that,